Hey guys, welcome back to Pages with Sidra. Today, we're diving into Chapter 30 of Surviving as a Genius on Borrowed Time. If you haven't checked out the previous chapters, be sure to watch them on my channel. Now, without further delay, let's get started. The mountains were alive with movement. Amidst the chaos of repelling an attack and tending to the wounded, the elite warriors of the Zhongnan sect had returned. They had just launched a counterattack on a branch of the Sword sect, a bold move in these turbulent times. A day later, Yunshin was granted an audience with none other than the ruler of Mount Zhongnan. Accompanying him was Elder Yeo Ilshin, who had once shown him favor during the Zhang family massacre. As she gazed at Yunshin, a thought crossed her mind. How fate weaves its threads. The child I saw during the Jiangga River blood incident is now restoring my husband's swordsmanship. Yunshin stood before two imposing figures, the air thick with silence. Before him stood the leader of the Zhongnan sect, a man of strikingly sharp features, his golden robe radiating an aura of power and prestige. His very presence was like a sword honed to perfection. His name was Oyangshin, the Western Sky Sword Lord, head of the Zhongnan sect, and the son of the legendary sword saint and Yeo Ilshin. Breaking the silence, Oyangshin finally spoke. Ma Guangxic's swordsmanship. I hear you have recovered my natural inheritance and passed the formulas to Manhwa. Moreover, you saved a disciple of our sect. It is only right that I reward you. Tell me, what do you desire from this sect? Without hesitation, Yunshin replied, his voice steady and unwavering. Please allow me to assist in the fight against the tyrant sword sect. Oyangshin studied him for a moment before nodding. Scene shift, Manhwa and the Elder. The sun hung high in the sky, its golden rays cascading over Manhwa, who stood poised with her sword raised. Her stance was elegant, the blade shimmering in the crisp mountain air. Yet, despite the tranquility of her surroundings, her sword was anything but calm. She was practicing the Nine-Yang unified art, a devastating single-strike technique. Suddenly, the movement was disrupted. The flawless execution she sought slipped from her grasp. From the sidelines, the sword immortal clicked his tongue in disapproval. You can't focus at all. Manhwa lowered her sword slightly, frustration evident in her voice. I'm sorry. My technique is a mess. The elder observed her closely. Is it because of Yunshin? Manhwa shook her head. No, the problem lies within my own heart. She had already acknowledged Yunshin's skill. This wasn't about jealousy. No, her frustration stemmed from something deeper. Her entire life had been dedicated to honing her martial arts. Yet now, seeing Yunshin's technique, it all felt meaningless. It wasn't envy. It was emptiness. After a moment, she turned to the elder, voicing her thoughts. His sword technique, the radiant sword style, isn't inferior to the Nine-Sun sword, is it? The elder gave a knowing nod. Indeed. The elder answered briefly there was no need to elaborate on Yunshin's martial arts. At that moment, memories of Yunshin's relentless training surfaced. Manhwa's voice echoed through the reflection of her thoughts. It wasn't just at the level of a first achievement. While sparring with me, he surpassed the first achievement, then the second, and even the third. It's unbelievable that he created such a supreme martial art, but even more so that he mastered it without prior experience and surpassed my Nine-Sun sword. The elder listened in silence before finally speaking. That child has already reached your goal. Manhwa slowly lowered her sword and met the elder's gaze. He continued, his voice calm and deliberate. He is a grandmaster who transcends age. It's only natural for him to master a martial art of his own creation so quickly. This is the way of all human endeavors. The creator's body is always the most suited to their creation. There isn't a single martial art in the world that does not follow this truth. Manhwa's grip on her sword tightened. Is he someone with unprecedented talent? Someone even I can't catch up to? The elder nodded. Shaolin de Mo. Wudong's founder Sambong Jin. They were the same. To live in the same era as such a grandmaster is either a curse or a blessing, depending on how you see it. But you, Manhwa, have inherited the eclipse of the Nine-Sun sword. Your path is your own. Manhwa closed her eyes for a brief moment. Then, a faint smile appeared on her lips. You're right. It's a grace beyond measure. It was a smile of resignation. She had spent her life honing her swordsmanship. Her pride as a sword dragon and the burning passion of youth urged her not to be left behind. Yet, no matter how much her heart screamed, she couldn't bring herself to turn away from Yunshin completely. The elder sighed, his expression clouded with hesitation. I didn't want to say this. He hesitated, then finally spoke. You must listen carefully and keep this to yourself. Manhwa frowned. What is it? The elder's voice was low, his words deliberate. It's about Yunshin. That child's by we point. It's connected to nature itself. Myowa's brows furrowed in confusion. The elder continued. It's subtle, but I've noticed it changing daily. He is absorbing an unnatural amount of energy from heaven and earth. And that is not a good thing. A chill ran down Myowa's spine. What do you mean? The elder's voice carried a heavy weight. He doesn't have much time left. Yet he fights, as if trying to leave his mark on the world. Myowa's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes widened in shock. The sword immortal, hands clasped behind his back, gazed at the mist-covered mountain peaks in the distance. Softly, almost to himself, he murmured, regardless of martial prowess or age, I have nothing but respect for Yunshin. Scene shift, the Guangzhong Plains. The vast Guangzhong Plains stretched endlessly beneath a stormy sky. The wind howled, sharp and merciless, as both sides prepared for battle. The Zhongnan sect's forces stood in formation, 200 warriors, their aura razor-sharp, ready for war. At the front of the battlefield, Yunshin stood tall, his gaze locked straight ahead. Facing them was an equally menacing force. The Tyrant Sword sect of the 13 Heavens, a sect known for seeking absolute domination through sheer brute force. And at their forefront stood a familiar figure. The Tyrant Sword sect leader. His expression was unreadable, his cold gaze unwavering. He stood motionless, a massive sword planted in the ground beside him, his energy radiating without restraint. Even from 1,000 steps away, the sheer force of his presence sent shockwaves through the battlefield. Now that Yunshin had fully mastered martial arts, he could comprehend just how absurdly powerful the man before him had become. Beside him, Wenchang narrowed his eyes at the overwhelming figure in the distance. That man is your enemy, Master Zhang. Yunshin turned to look at Wenchang, who stood firm, showing no intention of stepping back. Wenchang met his gaze. Why do you ask? Yunshin shook his head slightly. It's nothing. But deep inside, a thought crossed his mind. You didn't have to step in, but you did. A quiet sense of gratitude filled his heart. Without another word, he stepped forward. At the front of the Zhongnan sect's forces stood their leader, the sword master of the Western Heavens, Gu Yangqion. His piercing gaze remained locked ahead, unwavering. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the Tyrant Sword sect's side. The third disciple of the sword sect leader. I, Wei Muhayak, challenge anyone to receive my sword. A vanguard duel. A common practice in martial disputes, where mid-level masters clash to test each other's strength and shake the morale of the opposing side. Yunshin had experienced this before, back when he faced Manhwa sect's Yuhaian. He took a deep breath, then spoke. I have a request, sect leader. Gu Yangqion turned to him. Their eyes met. Go ahead. Yunshin straightened his posture. As the one who recovered the legacy of the sword sect's great elder, and the great elder's husband, I humbly request to step forward as a guest of Zhongnan's sect. Myowa, who had been quietly watching, frowned slightly. Her expression, always unreadable, now carried a complex mix of emotions. Gu Yangqion studied Yunshin for a moment before nodding. Victory was necessary, and among their ranks, there was no better choice than Yunshin. Go ahead. Thank you. With a deep bow, Yunshin stepped forward. Myowa, standing among the elders, watched as his figure moved toward the battlefield. Her gaze never left him. A supreme master, burning himself to carve his mark onto the world, stood before them. The sword immortal sighed, his words drifting into the wind. He's already a splendid young man. Wei Muhayak smirked as he faced Yunshin. Zhongnan sect's fate is already sealed. The young martial artist looked to be 17 or 18, caught in that space between boyhood and adulthood. His extravagant crimson robe and the gleaming, intricately forged sword at his waist marked him as someone of noble status. Yunshin vaguely remembered him. He had seen this man before back at the Zhang family's estate. An enemy. Wei Muhayak sneered, his gaze scanning Yunshin up and down with contempt. Ah, I remember now. You. From the Zhang family? Back then, you were nothing but a helpless fool floundering about. I should have killed you when I had the chance. His lips curled into a mocking grin. Lucky for you, you get to stand before me again today. Yunshin remained calm, meeting his gaze without emotion. You couldn't do anything back then, could you? Wei Muhayak's expression darkened. A martial artist's fate is to die by the sword. What justification does your grandfather, the former divine sword master, have to intervene? It would only taint his reputation. His arrogance was suffocating. The weight of his noble upbringing dripped from every word, every gesture. But Yunshin didn't respond. Instead, he simply drew his sword. His focus wasn't even on Wei Muhayak. His eyes moved past him, locked onto a different figure in the distance. The Tyrant Sword sect leader. Their gazes met. A sharp intensity filled the air as the two warriors stared at each other. And then, that's it for today's breakdown. Yunshin is about to step into another life-or-death battle, but this time, he's not the same warrior he once was. Will he overcome Wei Muhayak? And what does this silent exchange with the Tyrant Sword sect leader mean? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated. See you in the next chapter.